So, awesome. We're going to get started with our new concepts today, if we have no questions. So again, where do we leave off last class period? Let's take a look at our notes, if you would, please. In our notes, we talked about the for loop, right? The for loop. And so we know that this is the syntax for the for loop. When would you choose the for loop? When is it more precise or more efficient, rather, to use a for loop versus the other two types of loops that exist? Is when we know exactly how many times we want to execute one or more lines of code, right? We know exactly how many times. And so when we look at our for loop and the syntax of our for loop, we notice that here's our keyword for. We know that the first statement that's in the parameter for the for loop is where we initialize our control variable. The second value in the parameter for the for loop is where we have our condition, where we evaluate whether the condition is true. That in this condition usually involves the control variable. And then our third statement, but do not include your semicolon, but our third statement in the parameter is where we update or modify the control variable's value. We looked at an example last class period for sure, but we're going to take another look again at an example in just a second. So with that being said, let's write a new program here just to make sure before we go into our final concepts for lesson 5. Let's write a simple program, if you would. So let's right click, let's create a new file, if you would, a new Java class. Let's call this program my name, okay? My name. Just a simple program. I just want to make sure that we understand how for loops work. So a simple little program here. Okay, let's go ahead and include a main method here. Here's our main method. And I want this program to be interactive. So we want to include the scanner class. So import scanner class. So let's go ahead and do that first before we forget. So let's import, and then remember our java.util, and then our scanner class. Okay, so make sure we import our scanner class because this is going to be an interactive program. So get that out of the way. And let's go ahead and comment our closing curly brace here. So this is the end of main, and then this is the end of the class itself. All right. So thumbs up if you have what I have so far, please. All right. All right. So please, let's do the following. So the purpose of this program, I wanted to just describe it before we get started with any code. I want us to print your name multiple times. Okay? I want us to print your name multiple times. So for this program, what is going to be our input? And then what is going to be our output? Let's go ahead and define what that is. All right. So for the input, I want us to we're going to ask the user for the number of times that they want us to print their name. Okay. So the input is going to be the user inputs thank you there, Anthony, the number of times to print their names. I want that, okay? Their name, okay? So we're going to ask the user, we're going to prompt the user, hey, user, how many times would you like to print your name? And that's going to control how many times we're going to repeat, okay? So with that being said, what's going to be the output? Of course, that's easy. Their name, all right? Their name printed the specified number of times. Can I type today? Good grief. Let me make sure my mouse and keyboard are in a good position here. All right. So with that being said, I hope you all understand the scope of this problem, right? What we're talking about, what we're dealing with. So let's not write a lick of code yet. Let's talk it through. Let's think it through. So here we're going to declare some variables that we're going to need. Right, we're going to declare some variables that we need. We know we're going to need to create a scanner object. Create scanner object. We know we're going to prompt the user. So we're going to prompt the user for the number of times to print their name. That's what I'm going to do there. So we're going to prompt. Anytime I ask the user for some data, we've got to be prepared to retrieve that data from the input stream. So here we're going to read and store the number of times. The number of times to print. Okay. And we're going to put that in memory. We're going to read it and store the number of times to print and put that in memory. Once we have that value, then we're going to use a loop. And because in which particular loop would we need? Once the user tells me, hey, let's say that the user says, I want to print my name 10 times. Well, then we will know exactly how many times we need this loop to repeat. So of the loops now, we know we've looked at all and have learned, have been exposed to all the loops that exist, the 3 types of loops that exist. So we want to pick the most efficient loop. Right. And so we know because of the user's going to tell me exactly the number of times to print. So we know specifically we should pick the for loop. Now, could I choose any of the other loops? Sure. We could have designed this and solve this problem using any of the 3 types of loops. But which one is more efficient? And that would be the for loop. Okay. So here we're going to use the for loop to print the name. The specified number of times. And then outside of that, you all, I'm just going to just put print, just a simple print statement, print done, okay? Just some print statement that shows that we're done, and that's going to be outside of the loop. So this is our plan. Can you put in the chat for me? What variables do you think we're going to need to solve this problem? What variables do you think we're going to need? Any idea? Let me get started here. What variables?
So I'm going to guess we're going to need a variable that we set the prompt that the user gives. Like they want to prompt 5 times. We set the prompt var to 5. Then there should maybe be a comparison. I don't know. I feel like you could use in the comparison or in the loop, you could use for prompt var or just something as the prompt var is greater than 0, print the name, then decrease the prompt var by 1.
Okay. And I want to say this, there's more than one way to solve this problem.
There are.
And so, but here, so I like the fact that you said we're going to need the user's input, right? We're going to need the user's input, right? Because we prompt the user, so we know for sure we're going to need a variable to store their data. So that, I want to make this very clear, you all. Anytime we ask the user for some data, you already know that we're going to need a variable for that, right? We got to store that value. So here.
We're also going to need a string as well to store their name input.
So that's only if I'm storing it in memory. If I'm printing, then we wouldn't need that. But yes, you're right. So they can we can hard code their value, but this program we didn't ask them what their name was necessarily. We just asked them, right? So if you want to make it a little more complex, what we could do is prompt them for their name. Would y'all like to do that? Let's increase this really quickly. Let's talk about, so we're going to print the name the multiple times. User inputs, the number of times to print. Let's add this to the screen because I like that, Anthony. Let's add this additional requirement, the inputs, and we can say, and the user's name. We can prompt the user for the user's name. Is everybody good with that? So add this additional problem. Now, that's the old, so we have two inputs. So this is this is one input. We'll do this, just everybody add this additional requirement, please. And here's our second input. All right, the user's name. Very good. So let's add the comments before we write a look of code here. So here I have created my scanner object. I prompt my user for the number of times to print their names. Let's see here. Oh, and I read it. Let's read it right after it. Right after that. Hold on just a second. Okay, I'm going to read it. After I read the number of times, do this, please, you all. We're going to prompt the user for their name. Okay, and then we're going to turn around and read it. Read and store their name. Everybody good with that? Thumbs up if you've added that requirement. I like that new requirement. That's fine. So Ardania, I see there. So you said int variable. So here, so now what variables will we need? We're definitely going to need an integer, right? And we can call it anything we want, right? I'm going to say num times. It's going to be my integer. Okay, and let's spell this out. This is the number of times to print their name. Okay, and I'm going to put in here that's user input. The user is going to give us that. That variable is going to represent that. And Anthony, you mentioned we added this additional requirement, so we know that another input is going to be their name. So we know that that's going to be a string, right? String, and we can say maybe username. Okay, that's going to be and we know this is also going to be user input. Okay, that's going to come from the user input, right, from the input stream. Let's go ahead and create our scanner object here. We all know how to do this. So scanner, we can say SCNR equals new and scanner. There's our constructor method, and there's our system.in. Very good. I hope everybody is with me and is following and understanding what we're doing, not just typing, but understand what we're doing. So let's go ahead and prompt our user here. So let's say system.out.print. I'm just going to use a print statement instead of print ln. So here, let's go ahead and prompt the user for their name. For the number of times, excuse me. How many times would you like to print your name? Okay, that's our prompt for our user. So now that I've asked the user how many times they would like to print their name, I've got to be prepared to read it and store it in a variable. So that means I know that I'm going to need the assignment operator. And what variable am I going to store that value in? Remember, that's the variable that I've identified that's going to store, that's going to retrieve. We're going to retrieve that input, that data from the input stream and store it in this variable called num times. So num times equals. And then I know because I'm retrieving data from the input stream, I'm going to need a scanner method. Which scanner method will I need for this? Quickly. Which scanner method? Which scanner method will I need to retrieve the data that the user entered from the keyboard? Which scanner method? Don't. Is everybody waiting for me to type? Nope, nope, nope. Which scanner method? Nope. Think about this. Look at num times. What is the data type of num times? Next int. Is everybody with me on that? They have to match. You're good. You're fine. They have to match. So very good. Again, if you're gonna make a mistake, let's do it now. That's cool. It's okay. Okay. So I have to say SCNR, right? That scanner object dot, and then I know that this is a variable, an integer variable. So I know I'm gonna need my next int. Okay. Next int. These need to match. So you look at the data type for num times, that tells you which method that you're going to need to use in order to retrieve that integer from the keyboard. Let's go ahead and now prompt our user for our their name, excuse me, their name. So system dot out dot print. I'm going to ask them, excuse me. Ask them for their name. Let me put my semicolon first. And let's ask them for their name. Please enter your name. Okay. Once I have their name, let's go ahead and retrieve their name from the keyboard. I've created this variable called user name, right? That's going to store whatever they typed in from the keyboard. So I know I at least have this on the left-hand side. You all put in the chat for me, which scanner method will I use to retrieve their name from the keyboard? Which scanner method will I use to retrieve their name from the keyboard? So so what I could use is next, but let's say that they enter your complete name, because I did not ask them for their first name or their last name. So I would want to retrieve all the way until they push enter from the keyboard. So I would need the next line. Very good. So it's all about what I ask for. So if I ask for the first name and last name, then if I want to break the strings up, then I would use the next method. But here, let's use the next line method. Next line, right? Method to retrieve their first and their last name. So not up to the white space. I would use next if I wanted to retrieve up to the white space, but if I want the entire line of code, or entire string, then I would use next line. Very good. All right, so let's set up our for loop, if you would, please. Let's set up the for loop. I'm just going to set it up. I'm not going to enter into any of the information inside yet. Just set the for loop up. And so here, there's my for loop. There's the syntax for the for loop, right? And let's go ahead and comment our ending, closing curly brace. So this is the end of loop, right? Now, how would someone help me with the first statement in my parameter for the for loop? Give me the first statement. And these are the kind of questions I could ask in your exam. Give me the first statement for the for loop. The first statement in my parameter for the for loop. We know that's where we initialize our control variable. Help me, please. What is going to be the statement that will be the first statement in the parameter for the for loop? First statement in the parameter for the for loop. Quickly. Quickly, everyone. Using my variables, what will it be? What is going to be the number of times? So you're going to say you want to initialize it to 0? We can do that. Is that what we're going to do there? So what would I say? I would use it would be the whatever's going to control the number of times. So if you want to use I, that's fine. But we've got to initialize it. If we've not initialized it up top near our where our other variables are, we've got to initialize it here. Is everybody with me on that? You've got to give it an initial. I mean, you've got to declare it. I shouldn't say that. You've got to declare the variable either here or declare the variable above. So we have to declare it as an integer somewhere. So you can do it right here within the parameter for the for loop, or you can do it above. Okay, so just make sure you say that. So if we want to start at 0, that's perfectly fine. Someone help me with my condition. Help me write my condition quickly. What is going to be the condition? Given that my control variable here is I, help me write my condition, as long as what is the case? Because I'm initializing my control variable to 0, that's going to help me design the condition. What is going to be the condition? I need everyone's participation. Even if it's incorrect, we'll fix it. All right, I'm going to start calling people out. Morgan, you say as long as I is less than num times. High five, Morgan. Very good, because who's going to be my upper limit? My upper limit is whatever the user typed in, whatever the number of times the user said they wanted to their name printed. That's going to be my upper limit. And so we have to say, as long as I is less than num times y, because we're starting I at 0. So as long as I is less than num times. So the first time through is 0 less than whatever the number of times the user entered. And so that's correct. Okay, and of course we know that our third statement in the parameter for the for loop is going to be where we modify our control variable. So we're going to take one step at a time to a closer and closer to our upper limit num times. The upper limit here is num times. What do we want to do inside of the body of the loop? Inside of the body of the loop, of course, we want to print their name. System.out.print ln. I'm simply going to print their name to the screen some number of times, and what's going to print to the screen is their name, right? And that's going to be user name. Okay, username is going to print to the screen. Let's go ahead and count the number of times that as we're printing, just for testing purposes. And so what I could do here is I can say count, right? +1, just to print to the screen. To print to the screen the number of times. Don't forget to concatenate that. And I want to concatenate it with a dot and a space. And then there's my plus symbol. So does everybody see what I'm doing here? I want to prove to you that this is just for testing purposes. I want to include the number as I'm counting, as I'm printing their name to the screen, just to prove to you that we are printing their name, that the number of times that they specified. Okay. And let's print some statements that to say that when we're done. System.out.print ln. All done. All done. Okay, and don't forget your semicolon. So I hope you all can see, and I'll make sure that as I run this. So if I run this code, hopefully you all understand what this output needs to look like. So it's asking me here, how many times would you like to print your name to the screen? I'm going to say 7. You can put whatever value you like, matters not, because we're testing our program. So given this input, do I get the expected output? And here, oh, what did I do there? La, la, la. I didn't ask, did I not prompt the user? So here, this is why we need to test our program. I need to run it again. I didn't follow what the hold on just a second. Okay, I need to print. Let me run this program again. There it is. It's asking something is not right. Let me go ahead and look and see what's going on here. So system.out, please enter scnr dot next line. It's not reading. Hold on just a second. Give me just a second. Let's test this. Let's make sure that we've got this right. We've got this right. Hold on just a second. If I use next, let me run this program. I need to flush the buffer. There it is. Then it prints it. But if I use the next line, what's the issue there with the next line? Next LN. Oh, I used print and then it flashed. Okay, so the next line. If I wanted to concatenate their name and print their entire line there. So what do I want to do there? It's the order that matters. And I see what I did there. The order matters. Where I'm printing an integer and then I'm turning around and printing a their name to the screen. We can fix this several ways, you all. Let's do this really quickly. Follow along with me really quickly. Let's prompt for their name first, their prompt and their and where we're reading. Let's go ahead and do that before I prompt them with an integer. There's another way to fix this, but let's do it. Let's fix it this way really quickly. And I'll tell you why, how we could easily do that. We can close that that scanner object. So here's what I'm doing. I'm prompting. So here's what I'm doing, everybody. Let's prompt our user for their name first and then read the string using next line. I'm going to change that back to next line and then read the number of times to print. So remember, because the order doesn't matter here, as far as printing, just as long as we get the values for num times and their names. This is a quick fix for that problem. Let's see what that does. Let's run this program one more time. So if I ask them to enter their name and the number of times, let's say 7, then you can see it quickly does that. Why was it an issue to read next line after reading an integer? We would have to flush the buffer first, then read the entire string line, right? Because there's an issue with reading an integer, then reading an entire string. So we would have to flush the buffer by using this scanner object. And yeah, it's not very complex to do, but the order in which we're reading was the reason why we were having that issue with next line. Any questions about this example? Thumbs up if you understand this example. Any questions? Thumbs up if you understand this example when we have it. Very good. All right, the next thing that I want to talk about before we end class, I want to make sure that we go over this. If you can follow along in your lecture notes as well. Here are certain cautions that I want to bring to your attention before we talk about our last concepts that I want to address before we leave. Here are some things that you need to be mindful of when you're dealing with loops, is that the for loop does not end in a semicolon. Okay, so that would be considered a logic error by placing that semicolon there. That's incorrect. The while loop also does not end in a semicolon, right? That's also considered an error. The only loop that ends in a semicolon, just a reminder, is our do while, just FYI. Another consideration is as well some recommendations. When should you use? And as we introduce each of these loops, I emphasize when it would be ideal to use each individual type of loop. So remember, this is a summation of that. The for loop, when is it ideal to use a for loop, is when you know exactly the number of times, as we demonstrated in the previous example. If we know exactly how many times we want to execute the body of the loop, then we would use the for loop. When would you use a while loop? When you're not sure. Everybody understand that. When you're not sure how many times you want to repeat one or more statements. You may want to repeat one or more statements 0 or more times. Okay, 0 or more times. You're not quite sure. So every single iteration, you're going to be asking yourself a question. Is it okay to go back to, should I repeat those one or more lines? And if not, then exit the loop. So every single iteration, you must ask the question, and based on the truth value of that question determines whether you're going to repeat one or more statements. So you're not sure. What about a do while? When would I choose a do while versus a while or a for loop? When I know I want to execute the body of the loop at least one time before checking some condition. Okay, at least one time before checking some condition. So these are, again, the ideal times to use those 3 types of loops. The last thing, the next concepts that you're going to read, that you're going to learn about in lesson 5 are these statements. We call these statements jump statements. Let's go ahead and write some, add that to our I'm going to close those programs. I'm going to close my name and add this to my into my notes. So we call these jump statements. And so this is the third concept that we're going to look at here. We call them jump statements. So jump statements can be used. There are 3 types of jump statements that you may encounter. And what do I mean by jump statements? These are statements that control the flow of the program. So jump statements will control the flow of the program. Okay? And there are three types of jump statements that we're going to take a look at. The first type of statement is the break statement, and we've looked at that before, but we've looked at it, and we'll talk about how it relates to a loop. The next one is the control statement. And then the next one that you will see is a return statement. And so just FYI, we're not going to discuss the return statement, not quite yet. This will be discussed in lesson 7. Okay, when we get to user-defined methods. Okay, so jump statement is not, I'm sorry, return statement is not going to be discussed in this lesson. It will be introduced later. Well, let's learn about the break statement. So we've looked at the break statement already. Put in the chat for me really quickly, where have we seen and used the break statement before? Where have we used the break statement before? Put it in the chat for me really quickly, really quickly. Are you with me? The switch, absolutely, the switch statement, right? That's where we've seen the break statement before. Yes. So with the loop, when we use it, the break statement with a loop, the break statement when encountered, when a break statement is used with a loop, the loop, I'll put it here, let me branch this out. The loop will immediately exit. Okay, so the loop will immediately end, I'll just say that, end when a break statement is encountered or is executed. Okay, when the break statement is so a loop will immediately end whenever a break statement is executed. So whenever it encounters a break statement, it's going to completely end and execute. I'm going to say and execute the next line of code outside of the loop. Okay, outside of the loop. So just like a switch statement, it immediately exits that block of code when a break statement is encountered, and that is also how a break statement when used with a loop is going to execute. So let's trace through this code really quickly. I'm not going to run it. It is also outside. I've included this code in your code inspection folder on your modules page, but let's just look at it for the sake of time. Here you see this code right here on the right-hand side. You see that the class is called break for exit. So here in the main method, you see I have a for loop where I have I've initialized my variable to I to 0. And as long as I is less than 10, come inside and execute the body of the loop. And then I'm incrementing one step at a time using the I++, the post increment. So what do I have inside of the body of the loop? Each iteration, I'm going to come inside and ask a question. If the current value of I is equivalent to 4, get out of this loop, in the loop. If it's not, if the current value of I is not equivalent to 4, then just print that I to the screen. So I'm going to walk you through this really quickly. So the first iteration I is going to be 0. So is I equivalent to 4? No, it's not. So then it can't execute this standalone if statement. It's going to print that I to the screen, which is 0. So that's why we have 0 here in our output. Then the next iteration, we're going to increment I now to 1, and we're going to ask the question, hey, is 1 less than 10? Yes, it is. So come inside and evaluate this condition, this standalone statement here. So if 1 is equivalent to 4, which is not, so therefore I do not have permission to execute the body of that if statement. So I'm going to print I to the screen, which is 1. Now increment I now to 2. Is 2 less than 10? Yes, it is. evaluate my condition here. Is 2 equivalent to 4? No, it's not. So print 2 to the screen. Now break out of that body and increment now I to 3. And is 3 less than 10? Yes, it is. Is 3 equivalent to 4? No, it's not. So then I print 3 to the screen right here. And now I increment now I to 4. And I evaluate this condition. Is 4 less than 10? It is. You're given permission to come inside. And I evaluate this nested statement here. And I ask the question, is 4 equivalent to 4? Yes, 4 is equivalent to 4. Then that gives me permission to come inside and execute the body of the standalone if statement. And what's inside? Just a simple break statement. That means that the computer is going to break out of this for loop, okay, and execute the statement that's outside, okay? Never to return to that for loop. So that's why you see the print statement here, which says end of break example. Thumbs up if you understand how the break statement works with respect to a loop. Any questions about how the break statement works with respect to a loop? All right, we call it a jump statement. Now, the next statement that we're going to take a look at is, and I've given you several examples there in your slides that you can follow, along with, there are several examples in your code inspection folder that you can copy and paste in your programming environment to learn more about the break statement and the continue. So what about the continue statement? Let's talk about the continue statement. You haven't seen it before, so let's talk about the continue. So what is the continue statement? The continue statement, when encountered, it ends the current iteration and jumps to the next iteration. That's how it works. So read with me. So it does not, I'm going to say here, it does not exit the loop. Okay, it does not cause you to exit the loop. The control, what did I say? Control statement. Oh goodness, you all know and caught that? It's the continue statement, not control statement. Right, continue. So the continue statement, when encountered, is going to end the current iteration, and it's going to cause the computer to jump or jump to the next iteration. Okay, let's take a look at how the continue statement, which is also a control statement. So we have the break, the continue, and the return. Okay, so the continue statement works like the following. Let's take a look at this one. Using the same code that we saw a few minutes ago. Look how what happens with the continue statement. So just like the previous example, the same code, but instead of a break, we have the continue. So I'm going to run through this very quickly. So starting at 0, so 0 the control variable is initialized to 0. So is 0 less than 10? Sure it is. It's come inside. Is I equivalent to 4? No, it's not. So print I. Now increment I now to 1. Is 1 less than 10? Sure it is. Is 1 equivalent to 4? No, it's not. So print that, print 1 to the screen. Is 2. Now come up, increment I to 2. Is 2 less than 10? Sure it is. You give them permission to come inside. Is 2 equivalent to 4? No, it's not. So print 2 to the screen. Now increment I to 3. Is 3 less than 10? Sure it is. Now, is 3 equivalent to 4? No, it's not. So come inside, so execute the next line outside, print 3 to the screen. Is now increment I to 4. Is 4 less than 10? Sure, 4 is less than 10. Now come inside. Is 4 equivalent to 4? Yes, it is. Now you're given permission to execute the body of the standalone if statement. You encounter a continue. So what does that mean? You break out of the current iteration where I is 4, break out of this current loop, and that means you do not print. You do not print. You do not execute any of the code below a continue or a break. So if the continue statement is executed, all statements below it are not executed during that iteration. So what am I going to do? Jump up here and now increment I to 5 without printing 4 to the screen. So this is 5. Now you're going to do what? Ask that question for the rest of those for the rest of those, for where the iterations for I. So you're going to print where I is 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And of course, when the next iteration where you increment I to 10, 10 is not less than 10. So what happens here? This condition is false. That means you jump outside and print end of continue example. So if you look at and examine the output, you notice we did not print the iteration where I is 4 to the screen. I hope you can see how the continue statement works. You do not exit the loop. You exit the current iteration. Thumbs up if you understand how the continue statement works. And if you have any questions over the continue statement. Any questions over the continue statement? All right. If there are no questions for the continue statement. So the last things that I want to introduce, if we look at your textbook, you all, you're going to see that the concepts that you're going to be to examine in your lesson 5. Again, we talked about your while statements. We talked about the for statement. We talked about the do while statements. We talked about the break and continue. You have several programs that are optional to learn more about how these statements and concepts are used. You do have 2 programs that you're responsible for completing for lesson 5. Make note of that. Okay, give yourself ample amount of time. And if you have any questions or concerns as you're working on those exercises, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Damie. I do want to talk briefly about the nested loops. I want to demonstrate how nested loops work. So there are different types of nested loops that you're going to learn about in your reading. And what is a nested loop? And let's put that here in our notes. So let's talk about nested loops. We're not going to, you're going to read about and look at several examples of nested loops. But I just want to make sure we understand and appreciate what they are briefly. So nested loops. What are they? They are loops, right? Loops inside or embedded in another loop. And that could be various things. That can be a for inside of a while, or a while inside of a for, or a while inside of a while, right? Or a do while inside of a while, or vice versa. Just a loop inside of a loop. And again, that whenever we use nested loops, please be mindful that you're increasing the complexity of your program, right? I simply want to give you an example. I'm going to give you a brief example of what we mean by a nested loop. And so not very hard to understand, but again, I want to make sure that as you are reading through your example there, that you appreciate what we mean by a loop inside of a loop. So here, let's talk about this as an example here, a loop inside of a loop. So maybe a for loop inside of a for loop. This is quite complex, but I want you to appreciate how this would execute. So when we say a loop inside of a loop, this is an example of a nested loop, a for loop inside of a for loop. And it could be quite complex. So let me just give you an example of a loop inside of a loop. I'm going to demonstrate, and I've already gotten the code here. And what I want you to do here is you can copy and paste this code that I'm about to print. I'm going to put it in your comment section. So FYI, everybody, please do the following. I want you to copy and paste the code that you have in the comment section. Okay, we're going to, as a demonstration of how a loop inside of a loop works. So does everybody see that code? What I'm gonna do after I'm gonna create a new file, new Java class, and let's call it nested loop 1. That's the name of the program, nested loop 1. Okay, and you can just simply copy over that and paste the code that I have in the chat, please. Just for this discussion, I just want you to see how nested loops work. All right, thumbs up if you have that code inside of your programming environment, please. It wouldn't let you copy it. You might want to right click on the code. So for instance, if you see, can you see my screen right now? So we might want to just right click on the code and say copy. Does everybody see that? Can you all see this on my screen? So if you're having difficulties copying, is anybody successful? It does not let you copy. Everybody says that as well. Is that an issue for everybody? If it's an issue for everybody, I'll give you this code and I'll put it on our video. No worries. I don't think Zoom will let you copy. No worries. Just follow along if you would, please. And I'll give you this code. No worries. Don't worry about copying. I will give you this code in your video in modules page where the video, when I post the video for this lecture. Okay. So, but just follow along with me, please, on the screen. If you notice, I've initialized two variables, num1 and num2. You see, I have a loop inside of a loop. Here's my outer loop, my outer for loop. Everybody see the outer for loop. I've initialized my outer, who's going to control how many times I execute the outer loop? Num2 is. Does everybody see that? And my inner loop, who's going to control how many times I execute the inner loop? Num1 is. Okay, so put in the chat for me really quickly. Who do you think, num1 or num2, is going to change the quickest? The quickest. Who's going to change the quickest? My num2 or my num1? Everybody put your thoughts in the comments. Just everybody should have a thought. Everybody should have a thought. Which one is going to change its value the quickest? River is the only one that has an idea. Just put your thoughts. Put your thoughts in the comments. I need everyone to participate here. Put your thoughts. It's either num1 or num2. That's all it is, num1, num2. Okay. So here, actually, it's going to be, num1 is going to change the quickest, which is your nested, the variable that controls your nested. So watch what's going to happen here. What's going to happen here? What am I printing in the nested loop? I'm printing in the nested loop the current value of num2 and the current value of num1. Here's what I want you to appreciate. Num2 is initialized to 0. So when num2 is initialized to 0 for the first iteration, I'm going to ask the question, is 0 less or equal to 5? Yes, it is. So you're given permission to come inside and execute this nested loop. This nested loop initializes num1 to 0, right, from the start. And it's going to ask the question, is 0 less than or equal to 5? It is. So you're then going to come in and print 0, 0 to the screen. Guess what? You're still stuck inside of this loop until this nested loop is false. So what's going to happen? Once you print 0 space 0, you're going to come here now and iterate num1. So now num1 becomes 1, and you're going to come over here and ask the question, is 1 less than or equal to 5? Yes, it is. So you're going to be given permission to come inside. And now, what is num2's value? Num2 has not changed. So num2's value still is going to be 0. But num1's value has changed. So now what am I printing to the screen? 0 space 1. Once I do that, I've got to come here and now iterate num1's value. Now num1 is 2. What am I going to do? Come inside, say, is num2 less than 5? Sure it is. Because num2 is less than 5, I'm going to come here and print. What am I going to print? I'm going to print 0 space 2. So here, run this. If I run this program, you're going to see the output. And this is me demonstrating to you that the outer loop is going to increment slowly, but the nested loop is going to iterate very quickly. Is everybody with me? So when num2 is 0, do you realize this nested loop is going to print to the screen is going to increment and until it becomes false. So 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. So who's changing the quickest? Num1 is changing the quickest. Does everybody see that? Because look at the order in which I'm printing. Num2 is what's on the outside. Num1 is what's inside. Okay? So until num1 becomes false, you cannot exit that nested loop. So it's when do you exit that nested loop? When num2 becomes false is when you exit that loop, and that's when 5 is equivalent. So when 5 is equivalent to 5, that's the last time you're going to print. So when num2 becomes 6, you do not get permission to come inside and print. You're going to have to go out, exit that nested loop and go outside, and now finally increment your outer loop to 1, and you go back into that nested loop as if you've never been there before and start all over again, that nested loop. Does everybody see how this works? So the outer loop only executes after the nested loop becomes false. Does this make sense, everyone? So this is an example of how the nested loop works. I promise, post this example code, the nested loop 1.java file. I'll post it on your course website. Questions or concerns for me? Here's what I want you all to do. I do have a class reflection. I'm going to increase the time of when it's open. Okay, I'm going to give you 15 minutes or so until to do it really quickly. It's an easy exercise here, but there's our code in class reflection for today, and the code. I'm going to put it in the chat for you all. What is today's date? It's the 22nd, 23rd, right? There we are. And so here's the code there. I will increase the time, give you a little more time there to complete it. Make sure that you can log in and that code works for you. And you all have a great weekend. If you have any questions or concerns as you're wrapping up lesson 5, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Damie. All right, you'll have a great weekend, and it was a pleasure.